The American captain's flashlight swept across the barn's interior, its beam cutting through darkness thick with the smell of hay and animals. Marie Beaumont stood rigid in the doorway, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles had gone white. Behind her, in the farmhouse, her daughter Claire lay burning with fever, too sick to understand what was happening, too young to know that her mother might never return. "Ma'am, we have intelligence that you're harboring an enemy combatant," Captain Robert Hayes said, his French heavily accented but understandable. "I need you to step aside." Marie did not move. She was 32 years old, a widow since 1940, when her husband had been killed during the German invasion. For 4 years she had survived occupation through silence and invisibility, keeping her head down, avoiding attention, doing whatever was necessary to keep Claire alive. Now, in the summer of liberation, she had finally made a choice that mattered, and it would probably cost her everything. "There's a man in the barn," she said quietly. "He is injured, badly injured. If you take him, he will die." Hayes studied her face, tried to read the motivation behind her words. Was she a collaborator, a sympathizer, or something more complicated? Behind him, for military policemen waited with rifles at ready, their faces hard with the wariness of men who had learned not to trust anyone in occupied territory. "Step aside, ma'am," Hayes repeated, his voice firmer now. Marie moved, not because she wanted to obey, but because resistance was futile. The Americans would find Fisher regardless of what she did, better cooperate, and perhaps earn enough goodwill to avoid the worst consequences. She watched as the soldiers entered the barn, heard their shouts of discovery, saw them emerge moments later with a man supported between two of them. Klaus Fischer looked worse than when she found him 3 days ago. His Luftwaffe uniform was torn and blood-stained. His left leg was splintered with rough boards and strips of cloth. His face was pale beneath several days of beard growth, his eyes unfocused with pain and fever. He had been unconscious when his parachute deposited him in her field, and he had barely regained consciousness since. Marie had done what she could, which was pitifully little given her lack of medical training and supplies. "This man needs a hospital," Marie said in English, surprising Hayes. "He has infection, broken bones, internal injuries possibly. If you arrest him, at least take him somewhere he can receive medical treatment." Hayes looked at her with new interest. English speakers were not common in rural Normandy, especially among women of her class. "Where did you learn English?" "My husband was a teacher. He believed in education. He taught me many things before the war killed him." She kept her voice steady, refusing to show weakness even as fear clawed at her throat. "What will happen to me? That depends on why you helped an enemy pilot." Hayes replied. He gestured to his men, who began loading Fisher into the back of a military truck. "You're coming with us. We'll sort this out at headquarters." Marie thought of Claire, alone in a house with fever that had been climbing for 2 days. "My daughter is sick, very sick. She needs me. Please, I will answer any questions. I will cooperate fully, but let me stay with my daughter." Hayes hesitated. He was not a cruel man, and he could see genuine fear in this woman's eyes. But he had orders, and those orders were clear about how to handle suspected collaborators. "How old is your daughter?" 7 years. She has pneumonia, I think. High fever, difficulty breathing. There is no doctor in the village anymore. He was killed in the bombardment last week. Sergeant Morrison. Hayes called to one of his men. "Check the house. If there's a sick kid, let me know the situation." Morrison disappeared into the farmhouse, while Marie waited with her heart hammering against her ribs. Everything she had done for the past 4 years had been for Claire, every compromise and sacrifice and silent endurance of occupation. She had sheltered Fisher not out of sympathy for Germany, but because he was human and injured, and because she could not watch another person die when she had the power to help. Now that choice might orphan her daughter. Morrison emerged from the house, his expression troubled. "Captain, there's a kid in there. She's in bad shape. High fever, struggling to breathe." The woman's not lying about that part. Hayes cursed quietly. The situation was more complicated than a simple case of collaboration. He looked at Marie, at the desperation poorly hidden behind her attempt at dignity, and made a decision that would probably earn him criticism from his superiors. "Corporal Davies," he said to another of his men, "you've got medical training, right?" "Combat medic training, sir. Not much, but some. Go inside and assess the child. Do what you can to stabilize her. We'll bring a doctor when we get back to headquarters. But for now, keep her alive." He turned to Marie. "You're still coming with us for questioning, but I'll make sure your daughter gets medical attention. That's the best I can offer." Marie nodded, blinking back tears that she refused to let fall. "Thank you. Her name is Claire. She is afraid of strangers, but she will understand if you tell her you are helping." They put Marie in the back of the truck with Fisher. Both prisoners now, though, for very different reasons. The Luftwaffe pilot was barely conscious, his breathing shallow and labored. Marie sat across from him, watching him with emotions she could not entirely sort out. 3 days ago, she had found him in her field and had made a choice that defied all the boundaries the war had created. German, enemy, occupier. None of those labels had mattered in that moment when she saw a young man dying slowly in the rain. As the truck rumbled toward American headquarters, Fisher's eyes opened briefly. They were blue, she noticed, and filled with confusion and pain. He said something in German, words she did not understand, then his eyes closed again. Marie wondered if he would survive long enough to face whatever justice awaited German pilots captured on French soil. She wondered if she would survive long enough to see Claire recover. And she wondered if anyone would believe the truth about why she had done what she had done. American headquarters had been established in what remained of St. Louis Town Hall, a building that had survived the bombardment with only half its roof intact. Marie was taken to a small office on the ground floor, furnished with a battered desk, 2 chairs, and a filing cabinet that leaned at a precarious angle. Captain Hayes sat across from her, a notepad open in front of him, while a French-speaking intelligence officer named Lieutenant Bernard stood by the window, watching her with undisguised suspicion. "Let's start from the beginning," Hayes said. "You found this German pilot 3 days ago. What made you decide to hide him instead of reporting him to Allied forces?" Marie chose her words carefully. The truth was complicated, and she knew that complications were dangerous when dealing with military justice. "He was dying. I am not a political person, Captain. I do not care about flags or nations or who wins this war. I care about my daughter. But when I found that man in my field, unconscious and bleeding, I could not let him die. It would have made me something I did not want to be. A collaborator?" Bernard interjected sharply. "Because that is exactly what you became when you sheltered an enemy combatant. A murderer," Marie corrected quietly. "To walk away from someone who needs help, that is murder through inaction. I have seen too much death in this war. My husband, my neighbors, children killed in bombardments. I could not add one more death to that list, even if he wore a German uniform." Hayes leaned back in his chair, studying her. He had interrogated dozens of suspected collaborators since the Normandy invasion began, and most fell into predictable categories. True believers in the Nazi cause, opportunists who had profited from occupation, people coerced through threats or blackmail. But this woman did not fit any of those patterns. Her motivation seemed to be something simpler and more complicated than politics. "Did he tell you anything?" Hayes asked. "Military information? Where his unit was based? What missions they were flying?" He was barely conscious. He spoke sometimes, but in German, and I do not understand German. Mostly he was silent. I gave him water. I tried to clean his wounds with what little I had. I knew he needed a doctor, but there are no doctors, and even if there were, what could I tell them? That I was hiding a Luftwaffe pilot? Bernard moved from the window, his expression hard. "You understand that what you did is a serious crime? That French citizens who collaborate with the enemy face severe punishment?" "I understand that I saved a life," Marie replied, meeting his gaze steadily. "If that is a crime, then I am guilty. But I will not apologize for refusing to let another human being die when I had the power to help." Hayes held up a hand, forestalling Bernard's angry response. "Let me ask you something else. During the occupation, did you assist the Germans in any other way? Provide information? Shelter other soldiers? Work in their facilities?" "No. I avoided them as much as possible. I kept my head down and took care of my daughter. That was my resistance. Captain. Survival. Keeping Claire alive through 4 years of occupation, through food shortages and fear and constant danger. I am not a hero or a traitor. I am just a mother trying to keep her child safe in a world that has gone mad." There was silence in the room after that, broken only by distant sounds of military activity outside. Hayes exchanged a glance with Bernard, some unspoken communication passing between them. Finally, Hayes spoke again, his voice less confrontational. "Your daughter. You said she has pneumonia?" "I think so. High fever that will not break. Difficulty breathing. Coughing that sounds like her lungs are full of fluid. I have tried everything I know, but I am not a doctor. I am just afraid, Captain. So afraid that I will lose her like I lost her father." Hayes stood abruptly. "Wait here." He left the office with Bernard, and Marie could hear their voices in the hallway, too quiet to make out the words but clear enough in tone. They were arguing about what to do with her. Bernard wanted prosecution, punishment, an example made. Hayes seemed less certain. Or perhaps he simply understood that the world was more complicated than military regulations allowed for. They returned after 10 minutes. Hayes resumed his seat while Bernard remained standing, his arms crossed, clearly unhappy with whatever decision had been reached. "Here's what's going to happen," Hayes said. "You'll remain in custody while we verify your story and check for any other collaboration activities. If you're clean, and I think you probably are, we'll release you with a warning. But understand this, Mrs. Beaumont. The war isn't over. There are still German forces in France. Still danger, still need for vigilance. If you encounter any other enemy personnel, you report them immediately. Is that clear?" "Yes, Captain. Thank you. As for your daughter, I've sent Corporal Davies back to your farm with proper medical supplies. He'll stay with her until a doctor can get out there, which should be sometime tomorrow. The doctor will assess her condition and provide treatment. Consider a gesture of goodwill and an investment in making sure you understand which side you should be supporting." Marie felt tears threatening again and forced them back. "I do not know how to thank you. You can thank me by staying out of trouble and raising your daughter to understand that compassion shouldn't extend to people actively trying to kill us." Hayes gestured to the door. "There's a holding area downstairs. You'll stay there tonight. Someone will bring you food and water. Tomorrow we'll see about getting you home." As Marie was escorted from the office, she passed by a doorway that opened onto what appeared to be a makeshift medical ward. Inside, she caught a glimpse of Klaus Fischer lying on a cot, an American medic working on his injured leg. The pilot was conscious now, his face tight with pain as the medic cleaned and resplinted the broken limb. For a moment, their eyes met across the distance, and in Fischer's gaze, she saw something that might have been gratitude or might have been confusion, or might have been the same complicated mixture of emotions she felt herself. The holding area was a basement room with stone walls and a single small window near the ceiling. There were 3 other women there, all suspected collaborators awaiting interrogation. They looked at Marie with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion, but no one spoke. Each woman was wrapped in her own fears, her own calculations of what might happen next. Marie sat on a wooden bench against the wall and thought about Claire. Was the fever breaking? Was Davies able to help? Would her daughter understand why her mother had not come home? The questions circled endlessly, unanswerable, feeding the anxiety that gnawed at her like a physical pain. One of the other women finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "What did you do?" "I helped someone who needed help," Marie replied. "And now I am here." The woman nodded slowly, as if that explanation made perfect sense in the upside-down logic of war. "I gave food to a German soldier who was hungry. Just bread and cheese, nothing more. But someone saw and reported me. Now they say I am a collaborator." Another woman spoke up, older, her face lined with years of hardship. "I worked as a cleaner in a building the Germans use as offices. I needed the money to feed my grandchildren. I never passed information, never assisted them in any meaningful way. But I cleaned their floors, so now I am a traitor." The third woman said nothing, just stared at the floor with empty eyes that suggested she had already given up hope of explaining herself, of making anyone understand the impossible choices that occupation forced upon ordinary people. They sat together in silence after that. For women who had tried to survive in their own ways, who had made compromises or shown mercy or simply done what they had to do to keep themselves and their families alive. And now they waited to learn whether those choices would be forgiven or punished, whether the liberation they had supposedly been waiting for would save them or destroy them. Marie closed her eyes and prayed, not to any particular god but to the universe itself, that Claire would survive the night, and that somehow, against all odds, they would both make it through this war with their humanity intact. Morning came with weak sunlight filtering through the basement window, and the sound of boots on the stairs. A young private appeared with 10 cups of coffee and bread that was stale but edible. The women ate in silence, each lost in private anxieties about what the day would bring. Marie forced herself to swallow the food despite having no appetite, knowing she needed strength for whatever lay ahead. Captain Hayes came for her mid-morning. His expression was unreadable as he led her back upstairs to the same office they had used the previous night. This time Lieutenant Bernard was absent, and an older man in a colonel's uniform sat behind the desk. He had gray hair and tired eyes that suggested he had seen too many complicated situations and made too many difficult decisions. "Mrs. Beaumont, I'm Colonel William Thompson," he said without preamble. "I've reviewed your case. Captain Hayes has advocated quite strongly on your behalf, and I've also spoken with some of your neighbors who were brought in for questioning. They confirm you had no meaningful contact with German forces during the occupation. You kept to yourself, raised your daughter, caused no problems." Marie felt a flutter of hope, but remained cautious. "Thank you, Colonel. However," Thompson continued, "the fact remains that you did shelter an enemy pilot for 3 days without reporting him. That's a serious matter. We can't simply ignore it, even if your motivations were as you claim." He paused, folding his hands on the desk. "But we also can't ignore the reality that this war has forced impossible choices on civilians. So here's what I've decided." He pulled out a document and pushed it across the desk toward her. "This is a formal warning. You'll sign it, acknowledging that you understand harboring enemy combatants is illegal and will result in prosecution if it happens again. In exchange, we're releasing you with no further charges. You're free to return to your farm and your daughter." Marie stared at the document, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. "That is all? I can go home?" "That's all. Sign the document, and Captain Hayes will arrange transport back to your farm." Thompson's expression softened slightly. "I have a daughter about your Claire's age. I understand why you did what you did, even if I can't officially condone it. Sometimes being human matters more than being a good soldier or a loyal citizen. But next time you find yourself in a similar situation, remember that the war isn't over, and your first duty is to the people fighting to liberate your country." Marie signed the document with hands that trembled slightly. The relief was overwhelming, almost painful in its intensity. "What about the pilot? Fisher? He's being treated by our medical staff. His leg was badly broken and infected, but our doctors think they can save it. He'll be transferred to a prisoner of war camp once he's stable enough for transport." "Why do you ask?" "I just wanted to know that helping him was not for nothing, that he will live." Thompson studied her for a long moment. "You're an unusual woman, Mrs. Beaumont. Most people in your position would be trying to distance themselves from any association with a German they sheltered. You seem genuinely concerned about his welfare. He is a person, Colonel, a young man far from home, caught up in a war that has destroyed millions of lives. I do not know his politics or his beliefs. I only know that when I found him, he was dying, and I had the power to help. That is enough." Hayes drove her back to the farm himself, the jeep bouncing along roads cratered by artillery and lined with the debris of war. They passed columns of American soldiers moving toward the front, trucks loaded with supplies, tanks that rumbled past with earth-shaking power. The countryside was scarred by battle, fields churned to mud, buildings reduced to rubble, trees stripped of leaves by shrapnel. When they reached the farm, Marie ran into the house without waiting for the jeep to fully stop. She found Claire in her bed, the fever finally broken, color returning to her pale cheeks. Corporal Davy sat in a chair beside the bed, looking exhausted but satisfied. Medical supplies were spread across the table, evidence of treatment that had almost certainly saved her daughter's life. "She turned the corner about 3 hours ago," Davy said, standing as Marie rushed to Claire's side. "The fever broke, breathing eased up. The doctor came by early this morning, gave her some sulfa drugs for the infection. He said she should make a full recovery with rest and proper care." Claire's eyes opened at the sound of her mother's voice. "Maman," she whispered, "you came back." Marie gathered her daughter into her arms, tears flowing freely now that there was no one to hide them from. "Always, mon cœur. I will always come back to you." Hayes watched from the doorway, his expression thoughtful. After a moment, he cleared his throat. "Mrs. Beaumont, if you need anything, medical supplies or food, you can contact the Civil Affairs office in St. Lo. They're working on restoring services to the area. It'll take time, but things will get better. Marie looked up from Claire, her face wet with tears. Thank you, Captain, for everything, for believing me, for helping my daughter. I will not forget this. Just remember what Colonel Thompson said. Next time, report it. Let us handle enemy combatants. Your job is to keep yourself and your daughter safe. He nodded to Davies. Corporal, let's head back. After they left, Marie sat with Claire, holding her hand and watching her drift in and out of sleep. The house was quiet except for the distant sound of artillery, a reminder that the war continued even as this small corner of it had found temporary peace. Marie thought about Fisher, wondered if he would survive his injuries, if he would spend the rest of the war in a prison camp, if he would ever return to whatever home he had left behind in Germany. She wondered if he understood why she had helped him, if he would have done the same for her in reverse circumstances, if the humanity that transcended nationality and ideology could survive in a world that seemed determined to destroy it. These were questions without answers, philosophical puzzles that the war rendered both urgent and irrelevant. What mattered was that Claire was alive, that Marie had made a choice she could live with, that in a world of violence and hatred and casual cruelty, she had found one moment where compassion mattered more than sides or flags or the artificial divisions that men created to justify killing each other. It was a small victory, private and personal, but it was hers. That evening, as sunset painted the scarred landscape in shades of gold and orange, there was a knock at the door. Marie opened it to find an American soldier, young and nervous, holding a small bundle wrapped in cloth. "Ma'am, I'm Private Henderson. Captain Hayes asked me to bring this to you." He handed her the bundle, said you'd understand what it meant. Marie unwrapped the cloth and found a Luftwaffe officer's identification book. Klaus Fischer's name was written inside, along with a photograph of him in uniform, looking impossibly young and serious. Tucked into the pages was a note in neat handwriting. "Mrs. Beaumont, the pilot you sheltered wanted you to have this. He's doing better. Thanks in part to the care you provided before we found him. He asked me to tell you thank you, and that he hopes your daughter recovers. He also wanted you to know that if circumstances were different, he would have done the same for you. Some things matter more than the uniforms we wear. Captain R. Hayes." Marie stared at the identification book, at the photograph of Fisher, and felt something shift in her understanding of the world. The war had taught her that people were capable of terrible things, that ideology could turn neighbors into enemies, that fear and propaganda could justify almost any atrocity. But it had also shown her that beneath all the violence and hatred, humanity persisted. Small acts of kindness, moments of mercy, the recognition that the person on the other side was also human, also afraid, also just trying to survive. She tucked the identification book away in a drawer, a memento of an impossible choice and its unexpected resolution. Someday, when the war was over and Claire was old enough to understand, she would tell her daughter this story, about the night she sheltered an enemy pilot, about the American captain who showed mercy when he could have shown only justice, about the German officer who recognized kindness even across the boundaries of war. It would be a story about survival and humanity and the stubborn persistence of compassion in a world that tried to extinguish it. And maybe, just maybe, it would help Claire understand that even in the darkest times, even when the world seemed consumed by hatred, individual choices mattered. That being human meant more than following orders or supporting sides. It meant recognizing humanity in others, even when everything else demanded you see only enemies. 3 weeks passed before Marie heard anything more about Klaus Fischer. The war moved on, the front line pushing deeper into France as Allied forces broke out from Normandy and began their drive toward Germany. St. Lo slowly came back to life, damaged but not destroyed, its people emerging from cellars and hiding places to begin the long process of rebuilding. Claire recovered fully, her strength returning day by day, and she began asking questions about the night her mother had been taken away. Marie told her a simplified version of the truth, that she had helped someone who was hurt, that the Americans had needed to make sure she was not working for the enemy, that everything had turned out well, because sometimes doing the right thing, even when it was complicated, led to good outcomes. Claire listened with the serious expression of a child trying to understand adult complexities, and seemed to accept the explanation even if she did not fully comprehend all the layers beneath it. Life settled into a new rhythm. Marie worked the farm as best she could with limited resources, growing vegetables and raising chickens, trading with neighbors for things she could not produce herself. American soldiers occasionally passed through, always polite, sometimes stopping to help with heavy work or to share rations that were far better than anything available through official French channels. The occupation had ended, but its scars remained, visible in damaged buildings and invisible in the way people watched each other with lingering suspicion, wondering who had collaborated and who had resisted and who had simply survived. On a morning in early August, Captain Hayes returned to farm. He arrived unannounced, driving the same Jeep, looking tired but more relaxed than during their previous encounters. Marie invited him in, offered him water and what passed for coffee in those days, and waited to learn the reason for his visit. "I wanted to update you on the German pilot," Hayes said, settling into a chair at the kitchen table. "Fisher. He recovered well enough to be transferred to a POW camp in England before he left. He asked me to pass along a message. He wanted you to know that he wrote a letter to his family, telling them about what you did. He said if he survives the war, he'll try to find a way to thank you properly." Marie absorbed this information quietly. "I did not help him expecting thanks. I helped him because it was the right thing to do. I know, but he wanted you to know anyway. He's not a bad person, Mrs. Beaumont. Just a young man caught up in something bigger than himself, same as millions of others." Hayes paused, choosing his words carefully. "I've been thinking a lot about your case since that night we arrested you, about the choices people make in wartime, and how we judge those choices. And what have you concluded, Captain? That it's easier to judge than understand. Easier to draw clear lines between right and wrong than to acknowledge that most people live in the gray areas between those extremes. You made a choice that technically violated the law, but it came from a place of basic human decency. The world needs more of that, not less, even in the middle of a war." Marie smiled slightly. "I think your colonel would not approve of such philosophy. Colonel Thompson understands more than you might think. He's the one who told me to check on you, make sure you and your daughter were doing all right." Hayes pulled an envelope from his jacket pocket. "He also asked me to give you that. It's a letter of commendation, stating that you provided assistance to Allied forces and that you're considered a friendly civilian. It should help if you run into any problems with other military units or with the civil administration once things get more organized." Marie took the envelope, surprised and touched by the gesture. "Please thank the colonel for me. You can thank him yourself if you come into town. We're setting up a proper civil affairs office, trying to help people get back on their feet. There will be medical clinics, food distribution, assistance with rebuilding. It's the least we can do after what your country has been through." After Hayes left, Marie opened the envelope and read the letter. It was formal and official, stamped with the insignia of the United States Army, describing her as a civilian who had cooperated with Allied forces and should be afforded all appropriate assistance. It said nothing about Fisher or the circumstances that had led to her arrest, simply presenting her as someone who had helped rather than hindered deliberation. It was a kindness disguised as bureaucracy, a way of protecting her from future suspicion or accusation. That evening, after Claire had gone to bed, Marie took out Fisher's identification book and looked at his photograph again. She wondered where he was now, if he was safe in the POW camp, if he thought about those days he had spent unconscious in her barn. She wondered if the war had changed him the way it had changed her, stripping away illusions and forcing confrontation with uncomfortable truths about human nature and national identity. She wondered if they would ever meet again, if circumstances would somehow bring them back into contact after the war ended. It seemed unlikely he would return to Germany. She would remain in France, and the paths of their lives would never cross again. But perhaps that was appropriate. Perhaps their encounter was meant to be a single moment, a brief intersection of lives that illustrated something important about humanity, even if it led nowhere beyond itself. Months turned into years. The war ended in Europe, then in the Pacific. France began the long process of reconstruction, both physical and psychological. The questions of collaboration and resistance were debated endlessly. Trials were held, scores were settled, and gradually the nation found a way to live with its complicated history. Marie and Claire survived, rebuilt their lives, found peace in the simple routines of farming and family. In 1949, 5 years after that midnight arrest, a letter arrived from Germany. It was addressed to Marie Beaumont, sent through multiple forwarding addresses, the envelope battered from its long journey through postal systems still recovering from war. Inside was a letter written in careful French, clearly composed with the aid of a dictionary. Dear Mrs. Beaumont, it began, "You do not know me, but I am Klaus Fischer's mother. My son returned from the war last year after spending 5 years in a prisoner of war camp. He told me about what you did for him, how you sheltered him when he was injured and dying, how you risked your own safety to show him mercy. I wanted to write to thank you for saving my son's life and to tell you that we will never forget your kindness." The letter went on to describe Fischer's life after the war. He had studied medicine, inspired by the care he had received from both Marie and the American medics who had treated his injuries. He was now working as a doctor in a small town in Bavaria, helping people rebuild their lives after the devastation of war. He had not forgotten the French widow who had shown him compassion when he was an enemy, and he carried that lesson into his work every day. Klaus wanted to write to you himself, the letter concluded, but he was not sure it would be appropriate, given the history between our nations. If you would be willing to correspond, he would very much like to thank you personally and to learn about your life and your daughter. But if you prefer not to, we understand. Either way, please know that your kindness changed not just my son's life, but his understanding of what it means to be human. That is a gift beyond measure. Marie read the letter 3 times, each reading revealing new layers of meaning and emotion. She thought about that night 5 years ago, about the impossible choice she had made, about all the consequences that had followed. She thought about Hayes and Thompson and the other Americans who had shown her mercy when they could have shown only justice. She thought about the gray areas between right and wrong, about how humanity persisted even in the darkest times. She sat down and began to write a response. It took several attempts to find the right words, to express what she felt without either minimizing or exaggerating the significance of what had happened. Finally, she settled on simple honesty. Dear Mrs. Fischer, thank you for your letter. Your son's recovery and his choice to become a doctor brings me great joy. I would be honored to correspond with him if he wishes. What I did that night was simply what any decent person should do when confronted with suffering. The fact that it seemed remarkable says more about the war than about me. I hope that as our nations rebuild, we can remember that we are all human first, citizens of particular countries second. Perhaps that is the most important lesson the war can teach us. The correspondence that followed lasted for years, letters crossing between France and Germany, building a friendship between families that war had made enemies. Fischer eventually visited, bringing his wife and children to meet the woman who had saved his life. It was an emotional reunion, marked by tears and laughter and a profound recognition that individual acts of kindness could transcend the boundaries that nations and ideologies created. Claire, now a young woman herself, watched her mother and the German doctor talk for hours about life and loss and the strange paths that had brought them together. Later, she would tell her own children about the night her mother had sheltered an enemy pilot, about the American captain who had shown mercy, about the way humanity persisted even when everything else seemed designed to extinguish it. It became a family story, passed down through generations, a reminder that even in the darkest times, individual choices mattered. That doing the right thing, even when it was complicated and dangerous and went against everything society demanded, was still worth doing. That the categories of enemy and ally, friend and foe, were less important than the simple recognition of shared humanity. And sometimes late at night, Maria would take out that old Luftwaffe identification book and look at the photograph of a young pilot she had saved. She would remember the fear and uncertainty of that time, the impossible choice she had made, the unexpected mercy she had received. And she would feel grateful that in a world that had tried so hard to divide people into sides and categories, she had found a way to remain simply human. War forces impossible choices on ordinary people, and sometimes those choices reveal a humanity that persists even in the darkest times. The story of Marie Beaumont and Klaus Fischer reminds us that compassion can transcend the boundaries of conflict, and that individual acts of mercy can echo across decades. If you want to explore more stories of humanity persisting in the midst of war, subscribe to join us as we uncover the moments when people chose kindness over conflict, mercy over revenge, and prove that even in the worst of times, the human spirit could not be entirely extinguished.